All right. Well, I just want to say thanks so much for coming out tonight. Excited to get into it. What we might do is like have people just kind of like combine at tables. It's always like a little bit of a, you don't know if they're going to fill in or not. So, but what we could do is we could, we're going to get started each night with what we start with is where your treasure is, which is basically just a fun way to kind of get the night going. And so when my brother went to college, he came back with all of these older brother games and tricks that were fun for him, but not fun for me and my other brother. And so one of them was a game called Name 10 Cereals, where he would like sit on us and pin us down and then tap on our forehead until we were able to successfully name 10 cereals. And so this is just an attempt at like redeeming the traumatic experience from childhood. But what I want to have you do then is as a table, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to name not 10 sodas, but as many sodas as you can. And whoever wins, whoever gets the most, one person from the table gets to come up and get something from the treasure box. So with that being the case, you got to have one person. Yeah, you can write them. Just flip one of the pieces of paper over right on the back. So you got a scribe at your table. And name 10 sodas, diet, caffeine-free, all that's included, vanilla, cherry vanilla, Okay, all right. 3, 2, 1, go.
Where your blood was spilled for my ransom. Everything I want.
10 seconds left. All right. 3, 2, 1. Okay, pens down. Pens down. Who's got more than 10? All right. Just barely? Okay. All right. Anybody got more than 15? Oh, yeah. You got 15? So winners in the back. Okay. You got more than 20? Oh, wow. Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, okay. So at this table, whoever's birthday is closest to today, they get to come on up and get something from the treasure box. All right. Just grab any one of them. They're all just books that are like helpful. That's a good one. They're all good. Mm-hmm. All right. All right. Well, we'll kick things off next week with the treasure box as well. So there'll be another opportunity to try and win a treasure that helps you find your treasure where Jesus invites us to locate it. So that should be good. But I just want to say, if it's your first time joining us on a Wednesday night, just thanks so much for coming out. Midweek Reset is really just designed to give us all a chance to catch our breath, to connect in community, to form relationships, and just to reset our focus on that which matters most, on Jesus. And so with that, each week, when it comes to how we go about that, Midweek Reset has a few different components. What we're doing in here is a class called Making Sense of the Bible. And the goal is each week that you walk away with two things. One of them being just a solid understanding of the passage that we're looking at for tonight. So you walk away having a clear understanding of some passage from the Bible. And then in addition to that, one or two skills that you can take with you that'll be really helpful just in reading and making sense of the Bible in your own life. And so that's the goal for tonight. That's the goal really for every night. And with that being the case, it's really more of like a sitcom thing where you can drop in on any week and there's still something of value to get out of it. Sorry, my keyboard is, did you take over for me, Trent? No? Okay. It's like partially working. So that's almost like worse than just flat out not working. But it's a different keyboard this time. So if you're curious, like what the format of the class, kind of what the underlying structure is, the Cara Bible Project, or the Cara Project, is like a nonprofit that actually two women from the Draper campus run from SMCC, and their hermeneutic, their way of studying the Bible is really what we're teaching here. And these are the 5 different components of context, history, author, research, and then application. Kara is the Greek word for joy, so that's where it comes from. So Kara, as we learn these skills to be able to study the word better, it gives us the ability to essentially live into the joy that Jesus invites us into. That being the case, our passage for tonight is John 1, 1 to 14. John 1, 1 to 14, the prologue or the introduction to the Gospel of John. So that's the passage that hopefully we all walk away with a clear understanding with. You should have had an NIV, New International Version copy of that when you sat down, and that's what we're going to deal with tonight. And so what we're going to start with is our second segment of the night, No Dumb Questions, which means there's no dumb questions when it comes to growing in our understanding of the Bible. So what this looks like is take about 5-6 minutes at your table, and you just start just by reading through the passage yourself and begin to write down in the margin things you're not sure about. Ask questions of the passage. The fact of the matter is, the only way that we can get a better understanding of what the Bible is teaching us is by first getting clear about what we don't understand. And questions are the best way to do that. So if you're like not sure what to ask, you've got some prompts up on the screen that can be helpful. But you can work with that. I'd say take like 3 or 4 minutes doing that. And then after that, take about a couple minutes around your table just to talk about what are the questions other people are asking. Like, what are you asking? What am I asking? Sometimes it's helpful to hear what other people are curious about. So let's take 6 minutes for that. started chatting around your table, feel free to just start having a conversation. And remember, there's no dumb questions. And sometimes one of the most helpful things is just to hear what other people are asking. All right, well, good conversation. Um, what we're going to do now is move into some other segments and begin to, maybe take like 15 seconds, kind of wrap up your thought, and then we'll move on. All right, so what we're going to do now is basically take those questions and just kind of set them aside for the time being, and we're going to work into kind of spend some time like learning a new skill that hopefully will help us to answer the questions that we have later on, and at the very least, if not to answer all the questions, to at least be able to walk away with a clear understanding of that passage. And so maybe the question is, well, what are we looking at tonight? What's the skill? And with that skill, I want to get into this segment called Why'd He Say That? Why'd he say that? Because when we look through the biblical writings, right, the truth is we've got 66 books written across a 1,500-year period by about 40 different authors. And the truth is, I think we understand this intuitively when it comes to different things within our own culture, things that are written within our own day and age, that when someone writes something, when someone says something, they do so with intent. There's a purpose. There's a reason why we communicate and say the things that we do. And I think a lot of times we understand that. But sometimes when it comes to the Bible, we can overlook that. And so the skill we're looking into tonight is actually just the skill of taking into consideration who the author is. Who's the human author who wrote this? One of the convictions we would have is that, as a church, is that the Bible, in a sense, has dual authorship. that in a real way, like God brought about the writing of these 66 books. But at the same time, every single one of these books had a human author whose personality, whose style, whose even skill as a writer we can see within their writing, and they're writing in response to real historical situations that are happening. And so the human author plays a massive role in shaping the meaning of these books. And so if we're to understand them, understanding who the author is and why the author is writing is a huge piece of that. So the question is, why'd he say that? Is significant for getting to an answer to that. So let's walk through just a few things. Why is understanding the author important? Everything we just said. And one key principle that I think is helpful is to not shout where the author whispers or whisper where the author shouts. And sometimes, this can happen where a person or a group will take one little thing that gets mentioned in passing that isn't even like a primary point. It's not the main thing that the author is saying, and build kind of a whole structure of belief off of that. When it comes to understanding the Bible, we want to place emphasis on where the Bible places emphasis. And so shout where it shouts and allow it to whisper where it whispers. Okay, so when it comes to author, there's kind of 6 different ways you could break it down. If that feels like a lot, let me just say tonight we're looking at two of them, which are the actual person themselves, looking at their background, their experiences, the culture that they grew up in, how that shaped them to basically understand, and even how it shaped them to craft the message that they're crafting. And so their background is really significant, but then in addition to that, the purpose. They're writing for a purpose. And so what is that? And some of those other things we'll get into next week. But tonight, we're just focusing on the author by looking at the background of the person and the purpose for which they wrote. Now, you might be asking the question, well, how do I learn that? How do I get a sense of what that is? And truth be told, there's a variety of different resources that are helpful. The best resource, though, is actually just the book or the letter that they wrote. Just by simply reading that, for example, the Gospel of John, what we're looking at was written by John. And one of the best ways to get an understanding of who John is just by reading the book that he wrote, because he tells us an awful lot about him. One of the interesting things about John, though, is we can learn a lot about him from other books in the Bible, too. And so if you might have noticed, one of the other, there's two papers that you had on your table, and the other one is actually... The other one's actually supplemental passages that help us get to John's background and purpose. So we're not going to do anything with those quite yet, but that's what those are there for, and later on we'll have the chance to look at those. Other resources, if you've got a study Bible, typically there will be an introduction to each book of the Bible within a study Bible, and it typically will tell you about the author and the situation they're writing in. It'll give you all that information. The Bible Project, again, is a wonderful resource for that. And then the Cara Project, they've got a whole section on their website for authors for getting into that. But honestly, the best way to learn is just by reading the books the people wrote. And I want to show that by looking at the book of Genesis here, a little bit at the beginning. So Genesis is the first book in the Bible. In a lot of ways, it lays the groundwork for really making sense of the rest of the Bible. I had a professor in Bible college who said that every major and minor theme of Scripture, of the whole Bible, is actually introduced in the book of Genesis. And so Genesis lays a massive foundation for everything that comes after it. And I think if you look at this one passage here, Genesis 1:1-3, just the first handful of verses, we come to it with all kinds of questions because of who we are, what our background is, what our culture is. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. We're conditioned to come to this passage and to so many other passages within Genesis with all kinds of questions. Like, man, did God create everything in 7 days? Or was this thousands of years? Or how did this happen? And did dinosaurs coexist alongside humans? Right? We've got all of these questions, which are definitely interesting and worth entertaining. But it's also, if we're trying to understand what the Bible's teaching us, one of the interesting things about this passage is it's easy to almost ignore the fact that it has a human author. And that human author had a background and had experiences that shaped him, and those things played a big role in why he wrote Genesis in the first place. And so if we get into that, author and experiences, the author of Genesis is actually a man named Moses, who was one of the most significant leaders in ancient Israel. And so Moses, he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. The class they're doing upstairs right now is actually a deep dive into that 5-book collection that Moses wrote. And Moses, he actually was born in Egypt. And through some, kind of really interesting circumstances that are recorded in Exodus, the second book of the Bible, he ends up growing up within essentially the palace of Egypt, growing up essentially within the royal family as almost like one of the sons of the king. If you've ever seen, there it is, Prince of Egypt. Yeah, it actually does a fantastic job of telling the story. I had Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat in my head. I was like, yeah, still great, but different person. So actually, that's another resource. If you want to learn about Moses, watch that movie, and your kids will love it too. But so he's raised within an aristocratic Egyptian family, a lot of access to education, a lot of access to kind of all the privileges that would come with growing up within that type of situation. But he identified with his people, with the Israelites, who at a certain point were suffering oppression, slavery. He tries to step in and free them on his own behalf, and it doesn't work. Things just kind of are a mess, and so he goes into the wilderness for like 40 years, and then eventually God, meets him there and invites him back. And so some significant things happen. He ends up, leading the people out of Egypt, and so you get a huge, basically you get Moses' story within the book of Exodus. But if you ask the question, what influenced him, right? He grew up within Egypt, and so within Egypt, there were multiple gods. There were many different gods that were basically all throughout, kind of woven throughout society that were worshipped for different reasons. That various origin stories, how all things were brought into being was different. Even the identity of humans was different. And so he's growing up in the midst of all of these things. And in a lot of ways, the way that he wrote Genesis was in direct contrast to those teachings. What he's doing is providing the truth, right, to the Israelites. But at the same time, it's important to take into consideration why he's writing in these ways. Another thing that's important to consider is just like the space of what's emphasized within Genesis. That's one way to get at the purpose. So he spends like the first 11 chapters talking about kind of primeval history. But then Genesis 12 to 50, the rest of the book is all about the patriarchs, the people who actually begin the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel comes out of their family. One man and woman have kids, and then they have, basically there's like through 3 generations, the 12 tribes of Israel come from them. And so he's writing to the people of Israel to provide them with an understanding of who God is and their history as a people. And so, yeah, so when we come back to this, Genesis 1 to 3, the question is, well, actually, let me just jump over here real quick to Exodus. Part of how you know how he's like writing to give them an understanding of who God is, in the book of Exodus, every one of the books that Moses wrote, there's a thing that he does. He introduces the theme in the opening sentence of the book. And so in the beginning, Genesis is a book of beginnings. How did all things begin? But also, how did the people of Israel begin? When it comes to Exodus, it opens with the phrase, these are the names. And so names are a dominant theme throughout the entirety of the book. The 10 plagues that happen, there's all these different plagues that happen to the Egyptians, like the Nile River is turned to blood. There's frogs everywhere. It's darkness when it shouldn't be dark. And the last one's the death of the firstborn, which is a direct challenge to Pharaoh's kind of godhood. But if you notice, every one of those, if you delve into the background, is a direct challenge to one of the Egyptian gods, saying that they're not actually gods, and that the God that the Israelites serve, the God that Moses is representing, is the one true God, the God who brought all things into being, and the God who is more powerful than every one of the Egyptian gods. But not one of them is named, because the whole theme of the book is names. And it's the book actually in which God's name is revealed in his encounter with Moses in chapter 3. And even in addition to that, one of the main questions people have is like, why is Pharaoh never named? We've got all this history about Egypt, and if they had just named Pharaoh, it would make it so much easier to place this historically. It's actually a huge slap in the face by Moses to Pharaoh to not name him. Because even like the Hebrew midwives, they're named in the opening chapters. And so in a way, it completely flips who is honored and who is not honored in the context of that book, and names are a significant piece of it. But when you come out of that background of all of these different gods, and you come to Genesis 1 to 3, in the beginning there was God. Before all things were brought into being, before space, before time, before matter, before all of that, God always was. And then God created the heavens and the earth. God brought all things into being. That there's one God who is not local, who's not geographical, who is the creator and the sustainer of all things. And later on in Genesis 1, he even talks about the greater and the lesser lights. And he uses that language because if you use the actual, in their day and age, if you use the words for like moon and sun, those were the names of actual gods. And so he uses greater and lesser light, but he puts those within the framework of God is the one who brought these into being. So they're not gods. They serve the one true God. So in a lot of ways, just by simply recognizing that this passage has an author who had a background and had a purpose in writing, it helps us understand what he's trying to get at. So with that, we're going to do this in kind of a fun way a little bit. 2 truths and a lie. Anyone familiar with this game? Okay, all right. Well, for anyone who's not, here's the way it works. It's a really good way to get to know people if you don't really know them all that well. And so I figured if we're trying to get to know the biblical authors, there's like 40 of them. There's not that many of them. I don't have one of these for every one of them. We're only going to do like 5 or 6. But it's where the way the game works is if we were just playing amongst ourselves, everyone would come up with 2 truths and 1 lie. And you present all 3 of them, and everyone else has to guess what the lie is, what's true and what is the lie. And so it's a really good way to just figure out, to get to know someone in that way. So for example, if I was talking about myself, I've broken my wrists 3 times. I used to ride a longboard, and also I dunked the basketball 1 time. So what's the lie? The dunking, unfortunately. Yeah, it's so sad. Yeah, but that's the lie for me. So King David, no one can look on the back wall too. That's against the rules, because if you look back there, you get a preview and you'll see it. So, okay. So 2 truths and a lie. King David is one of the biblical authors, also the most significant king in the history of Israel. He was a warrior and a musician. He wrote the book of Psalms, and he grew up as a shepherd boy. What's the lie? It's a tricky lie. He wrote some of the book of Psalms. He wrote a lot of it. He wrote more than anyone else in there. It's actually a book of 150 prayers that are written as poems and songs, and he wrote a lot of those. So he was a warrior, poet, shepherd, musician, king. He did a lot. Yeah. And actually knowing that about him helps you understand some of the poems that he wrote, the situations that he's in. Okay, 2 truths and a lie for Luke. Luke wrote one of the 4 Gospels, the Gospel of Luke. He worked as a physician or a doctor. He wrote Luke and Acts. He actually gave us he wrote Luke and Acts to give a detailed history of Jesus in the early church, and he was one of Jesus' 12 disciples. That's right, 3. He was not one of Jesus' 12 disciples. He tells us in the very introduction to Luke that he has written all of this on the basis of basically a bunch of research, a bunch of interviews, a bunch of investigative journalist type work that he's done to track down eyewitnesses, get their stories, get their accounts, and compile an orderly account of what happened with Jesus and the early church. So he was really close friends with Paul. Actually, there's a big section in the book of Acts where all of a sudden the word we starts showing up, like we went here and we did this and we did that. And it's like his way of including himself without ever naming himself within it. Because he was with Paul on some of his missionary journeys throughout the Roman Empire. Okay, 2 truths and a lie for Paul, probably the most significant author of the New Testament. He was a Roman citizen. He studied under a famous rabbi named Gamaliel, probably the most prominent rabbi of the first century. And during Jesus' ministry, Paul met and interacted with him. That's right, 3. He actually did not. We have no record of Paul interacting with Jesus in the 3 years that he was teaching and doing his ministry throughout Jerusalem. I don't know how. I'm not sure how that happened, but Paul meets him actually on the other side of the church being born, has this interaction with him when he's on the way to Damascus. Paul's like adamantly against the church, against Christians. He's a Jewish Pharisee, a religious leader, so he's going to Damascus, one of these towns in Israel, specifically to like hunt down and arrest followers of Jesus, and then has this dramatic encounter with Jesus that drastically changes the rest of his life. If you want to know about Paul, the book of Acts gives us the best understanding of what his life and story was. Okay, John Mark, he wrote the Gospel of Mark. So he traveled with Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary journey. He was one of the 12 apostles or disciples who were with Jesus, and he's likely the young man who fled naked from the Garden of Gethsemane that we read about in his book, Mark. It's two. Yeah, he was close enough to be there in the garden, but he's actually not named as one of the 12. There's passages like in Luke where we get the 12 named for us, and he's not included within that. But he has a really interesting story as well. He goes with Paul and Barnabas. They get sent out from Antioch on this first missionary journey throughout the Roman Empire, and he goes with them, and at a certain point, he just like deserts them, like abandons them. It's like it's too hard and he can't take it. We don't really get the details. When they go on their second journey, Barnabas wants to take him with, and Paul's like, absolutely not. And the two can't agree over it to the extent that they actually part ways. And Barnabas and John Mark go one direction, and Paul and a guy named, I think Silas goes with him at that point, and then Timothy joins later. But they split up into two different teams. Later on, you do see that Paul, he actually asks for Mark to be sent to him to help him in ministry. They reconcile later on. But Mark ends up doing ministry with Peter in the city of Rome, and then writes his gospel basically off of the notes of Peter. So Mark's gospel in a lot of ways is actually Peter's gospel, and it's written towards a Roman audience. Okay, speaking of Peter, he denied Jesus 3 times, denied that he even knew him. He worked as a fisherman before training under Jesus, and he was known as the apostle to the Gentiles. Gentiles, which is anyone who's not Jewish, ethnically. Yeah, it's 3. He was a fisherman when he gets basically invited in to follow and train under Jesus. He denies Jesus 3 times when Jesus is like on trial and being tortured before being crucified, and even while he's being crucified, or no, prior to that. But then the apostle to the Gentiles is Paul. Paul is that person. So, but they were both significant leaders in the first century. All right, Matthew. This is the first book in the New Testament, one of the 4 Gospels. He wrote his gospel primarily for a Roman audience. He worked as a tax collector. His gospel emphasizes the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy. That's right. Yeah, he wrote for a Jewish audience. That's why he's emphasizing the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy. In a lot of ways, I feel like Matthew is like one of the most sophisticated books in the New Testament. It feels like literary fiction, honestly. But it's so good. But it's the one where an understanding of the Old Testament plays the most significant role, I would say, in understanding it. But yeah, he worked as a tax collector, which means he was wealthier than most in first century Israel, but also hated by pretty much everyone. But Jesus invites him to be one of his disciples anyways. Which I think is fascinating. Okay, so that's just a little intro into several different biblical authors to give us all a better sense of who they are, where they're coming from. What we're going to do now is the 6-minute party and then the question box, and then when we come back, we're going to jump back into John 1 to 18. So if it's your first time, the 6-minute party is basically just a chance to catch your breath and chat with people. You can discuss those questions up on the screen if you want to get a drink or anything like that. But also when we come back, that brown box on that table, I'm going to open it and basically take 5 minutes and pull out all the questions that are in there and answer as many as I can. So if you have a question about anything, feel free to grab a slip of paper, write it down, and drop it in there. And then when we come back, I will answer as many of those as I can. So 6-minute party. Enjoy yourselves. Bring it back in like 20 seconds. We'll get into the question box. it's it's Yeah, all right. Let's bring it back together. Bring it back together. Okay, so my favorite candy is, well, I was just telling these guys, and I was shouting, so you probably all heard, but it's licorice. It used to be Twizzlers until I discovered the magic. My brother introduced me to the magic, old wonderful thing that is Wiley Wallaby licorice. It's Australian licorice. It's so good. It's fantastic. So highly. No, I haven't. Is that good too? Oh man, I mean I like I like the straight up red flavor, but they got a green apple that is so good too. Oh, I like Swedish fish. No. Is that like? Yeah, Swedish fish is Swedish, like Lucky Charms is Irish. Yeah. Yeah, no, I've never had it. Yeah, I will. Yeah. That's right. Okay, we'll do the question box. I'm gonna go 6 minutes this time, just to give us a little bit. We were doing pretty good on time tonight, so. But I reserve the right to take time to do research and get back to you on an answer. I will just pass and then I'll get back to you. So we will answer every question, but I reserve the right to not answer it right now, basically. So, okay. All right, here we go. What are your thoughts on the rapture? Okay, so the rapture is this idea that what we look forward to is the return of Jesus, right? When heaven meets earth. And the rapture is this idea that leading up to that, there's this period of tribulation where essentially things get really bad in the world, that there's wars and all kinds of terrible things. And the rapture is this idea that at some point around that period, either at the beginning of it or in the middle of it or at the end of it, the thought is that's a 7-year period. At a certain point, the church is raptured, almost like if you've ever seen the Left Behind series, it's been portrayed in movies where it's almost like a kid walks in to the room where the parents were and their clothes are there, but they're gone because they've been taken up in the rapture. And so the idea is followers of Jesus, the church across the whole world, in that moment gets essentially taken and removed out of the earth for the worst of which occurs prior to the return of Jesus. And I'll say this, there are people who are very well versed in the Bible and they wholly believe and hold to a rapture. Myself, I'm if it happens, that I'm sure I'll enjoy it and it'll be great. But I'm not but I'm not holding my breath on it. I don't have a strong belief in the rapture. I would say that because there's not many passages that speak to it. There's one in, I want to say, 1st or 2nd Thessalonians, and there's some passages in the Gospels that if you hold to that with 1 Thessalonians, you can read these other passages into it. But I don't think that's necessarily the best interpretation of those passages. Okay. If Jesus is God, why does he pray to himself, asking God to take this away from him before his crucifixion? Yeah, so that's a reference to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus knows that the cross is set before him, and he's essentially praying that this cup of suffering, that this would be removed for him, that he wouldn't have to actually go about this way, that he wouldn't have to give it his life. But that's actually not the only time that we see Jesus pray. You even see him and the disciples, they sing a worship song together after the Last Supper, and he prays at several points throughout the Gospels. And the reason why that happens is because on the one hand, he stepped into our humanity. So he's living the perfect life that you and I never could. That Jesus is fully God, always has been fully God. But in the incarnation, actually the passage we're studying tonight, it tells us about how he stepped into our existence, took on our humanity. And so in a sense, prayer makes sense for him in that way because he's essentially showing us what a human is supposed to be. But in the same vein, the nature of God plays into that conversation as well. And what we believe is that there's one God who's eternally existed in three persons, Father, Son, and Spirit. And so for all of eternity, the three have been in relationship with one another. And so prayer, when Jesus is taking on our humanity, prayer is just a way for him to continue the relationship and conversation with someone he's been in relationship with for all of eternity. So again, one in being, three in person, Father, Son, and Spirit. Okay. Wait, did I answer that? If Jesus is God, why does he pray to himself, asking God? Okay, got it. So that's why he prays. But to take this away from him, I think in a lot of ways it just has to do with he understands the magnitude of what he's about to go to. And it's, in a way, I think there's something pretty beautiful and significant about it, because it's a demonstration of, it wasn't like obedience was necessarily easy for him. That he allowed himself to feel the emotions that he was going through in the midst of that. There was essentially almost a moment of panic, a moment of extreme fear, a moment of dreading what's to come. Almost about as intense emotional suffering, I think, as you could imagine. And yet through that, he turns to God in prayer, is strengthened by that, and then is able to essentially move through that. And I think in a lot of ways, he's saying, if there's any other way for this to happen, I don't want to do that, but I'm willing to submit to your will. And so I'm not sure if I have if that answers the question in its entirety, but is the question, why was his will different?
So, kind of, I guess for me, when I read that, I'm kind of why are you praying to yourself to ask yourself to take something away from yourself? So that's more of the root of the question. Because when I read that, it's like a conversation between two people.
Yeah.
It's one unified being.
Yeah.
My understanding, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
That was my question.
No, that's a good question. So I would say, in the incarnation, he steps into our humanity, and his experience as a human is real, because he's 100% human, but also still 100% God, and one in being, but still three in person. And so his experience as a human, I think, is what plays the most significant role in him not wanting to go through what he's about to go through. Yeah. It's a great question. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Several times throughout the Bible, God wipes out entire cities because of their sins. Why not now? Would a flood be really helpful right now? I don't know about that last one. So if you go back to the flood account, on the other side of it, he gives to Noah a sign. He forms a covenant there. Basically, God makes a promise to humanity and saying, never again will I destroy the world in this particular way. And the sign of that is the rainbow. So, the rainbow happens after it rains or during the rain, and it's a sign that, hey, it's not gonna go to this extreme. And so God makes the promise for that. I would say, why not now? It's because the punishment that humanity deserves has actually already been received in Jesus. That Jesus took the penalty, took the punishment that we all do actually deserve, and as a result of that, the only thing God really has left to offer us is love. There's no other judgment. I think if there's one nuance to that, at the book of Revelation, it gives us a picture of sort of when Jesus comes back, this moment called the Great White Throne Judgment, where basically all of humanity goes and stands before the throne in judgment. And it talks about the Lamb's book of life, and Jesus is the Lamb of God. And anyone whose name is written within that book of life is essentially good to go. And so the idea is there's two different groups. It's those who stand before God on the basis of what Jesus has done, and those who stand before God on the basis of what they have done. And the truth is, there's not one person who can stand in this group and actually be justified, be righteous, be worthy, be good enough. But Jesus has done everything that's necessary on our behalf. And so that's the invitation, is to trust in that. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. Okay, that's the question box. If you ask the question and the answer's not satisfying, just let me know, and we can dialogue about it some more, and then I can bring a more thorough answer to the rest of the class. Let me say that. Okay? All right. A flood right now. we got better boats now. So yeah. Yeah. Yeah, great questions though. I'll say this, keep them coming. I feel like this is like one of my favorite things of Wednesday nights. So, okay, with that, we're going to go jump back into why'd he say that. And again, we're looking at the Gospel of John, John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to take like 15 minutes at your tables. And if you look on the John 1 passage, that sheet of paper, at the bottom you've got written instructions just to kind of give more clarity on what are we doing in this time. But the goal is you've got these other passages in the second sheet, these supplemental passages, and I want you to see if you can use these passages to answer these questions. Why did John write his gospel? What was his purpose? And then from what background and experiences is John writing? And then if we can answer those two questions from these other passages, I think in a lot of ways that can help us to answer this main question of, seeing how having answered these questions, like what might John's main point be in John 1 to 18? So if we have these things answered, what might he be? Why did he say this? Why did he write this? Why did he put this at the very beginning of his gospel? And so then we'll come back together and talk about it. But take like 15 minutes for that. If you haven't started chatting around your table yet, feel free to start having a conversation about all these questions. And even in particular, the last one of why did John say this? Why did he write it? All right, about 1 minute left, and then we're going to jump into discussing it together. So 1 minute left at your tables. Bring it back together now. I would love to just hear about some of your guys' conversation around the tables, some of your interaction with the supplemental passages. Let's start with the first one. Why did John write his gospel? Why did John write his gospel? Anyone got a contribution for that? Chaz? Yeah, absolutely. I think that is like a very good way to put it. And one of the interesting things with John's gospel, the first supplemental passage, John chapter 20, verses 30 to 31, he tells us why he wrote the whole book. The whole reason why John put this together was so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. And so every other thing that's included within the gospel, the way he put it together, everything he chose to include, all of that is designed to help us be able to understand who Jesus is and to trust in him, to believe in him, and to find life in doing so. And so that includes this opening chapter, this opening section. That's great. Okay, what background and experiences is John writing from? Some of the other passages. Anything you noticed? Yeah, that's great. Yeah, he's Jewish. Yeah, that's great. Walked with Jesus. Yeah, he's one of the 12 disciples. So like day in and day out for 3 years. Yeah, see miracles. Yeah, and within the 12 disciples, he actually had like 3 that he was especially close with, Peter, James, and John. And so like even in this one passage, you see that he asks John to take care of his mother, knowing that he's not going to be around to do so, which if you think about it, that's a pretty significant thing to ask someone, also a significant honor, which it shows like the closeness of their relationship, like how close of friends they really truly were. So in a lot of ways, John was one of Jesus' closest friends in this life. And actually throughout the Gospel of John, he refers to himself as the disciple that Jesus loved, which is kind of funny. There's also a part where after the resurrection of Jesus, him and Peter, they hear from one of the women that was in the garden, they hear that Jesus is like, alive or not in the tomb. And so they run there. They like have a foot race basically, and he includes that he was faster than Peter, like he beat Peter in the race. So that's kind of funny. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else you guys noticed? I've never actually heard anything about that. No, so that's actually a good clarification. There's several. John was a super popular name in the first century, and so a lot of the Johns, they'll have a different, they'll have like something else attached to them, kind of like John Mark, because otherwise it's like hard to know what John you're talking about. So there's this John is just one of the disciples, but he's not related. John the Baptist is, they're cousins. Yeah. And actually in the first chapter, the John he's talking about is not himself, it's John the Baptist. Yeah, but he gets killed actually before even Jesus dies. He gets killed by Herod the Great, one of the, yeah, exactly, yep, beheaded. Yeah. Yeah, so John, yeah, there's John Mark, John the Baptist, and then this John. And this John, he wrote John's Gospel. He wrote 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and then he wrote the book of Revelation as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, anything else? I think that's mostly everything. Maybe the only other thing is that he was a fisherman, like Peter. He was a fisherman, and so in that day and age, like when you look at the biblical authors, some of them are, like Paul, studied under the foremost rabbi of his day. And so he's like educated, elite, and you can see that in the way that he writes. Like Paul's letters are some of the ones that are a little bit more, they take more work to like figure out what is he getting at, and they're more complicated arguments. Whereas John and Peter, their like writing is beautiful, and it's like, obviously it's included within the biblical writings, but when you hold it up alongside Paul's, in a lot of ways it's simpler and it's easier to make sense of. And I think in a lot of ways his background plays into that. Yeah, and so all those things we find out about who John was, what his background was, and his purpose in writing. And all of that plays a role when we come into understanding why did he write this passage. Him being Jewish actually is huge for this passage. So I'm just curious, is there anything else you guys would say for like what might his main point have been in this passage? Or actually, you know what? You got it, Sam? Yeah. Yeah, he was who he said he was. Yeah, and he is, and like what you were saying with him being Jewish, that plays a significant role here, because when we were looking at Genesis earlier, it starts with, the opening words of the Bible. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That's actually John 1:1. He starts with that. But Genesis 1 starts in the very same way. In the beginning, instead of was the Word, in the beginning God created. And you see those same themes. In the beginning, John doesn't say God, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Greek word behind, that is translated into just word in English is actually logos. And within Greek thought, it was the organizing principle that essentially brought order to the world. And so there's part of that is at play too. That's part of the reason why he chooses that particular word. Logos, Logos. Yeah, so in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So in a way, he's like doing everything he can to stress the fact that Jesus is God, but at the same time is separate from God. And this is one of the passages that plays a really key role in our understanding of God being one in being, but three in person. We see other passages that speak to the Holy Spirit, but here, at the very least, God the Father and God the Son being two separate persons within one being, one God. Yeah, and so you also see these themes of God, creation, light within Genesis 1, and he knew Jesus more than anyone. He's Jewish, and so he's trained within the Old Testament writings. And if you look, what he's repeating here, Word, created, and light. I think in a lot of ways, when you take his background into perspective, when you take his purpose into perspective, he wants us to know who Jesus is and to trust that he is God and to find life in believing so. I think through all of that, what we can see is he's saying Jesus is the Word, he's the Creator, he's light, he's God. And so trust in him, believe in him. Yeah, Catherine? Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think that part is great about, yeah, yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. And that theme of being born again plays a big role throughout the rest of the book, like in chapter 3. But I think you're right. He's the Word, he's the Creator, he's light, he's God, so that we would believe in him, and as a result of that, become children of God. Um, yeah. Yeah. Uh, yeah. Yeah, children of God have life in his name. The other thing that's interesting here, too, this is just like a fun fact. In verse 14, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Made his dwelling is like, if you could translate it, he like tabernacled among us, which the tabernacle is the first structure that is the place of the presence of God within the book of Exodus, second book of the Bible. And so there's even a connection to Exodus there. But I think in a lot of ways what it's saying, no one's ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. If you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. And John is like saying, you can read this and understand what God is like just simply by looking at who Jesus is and what he's like and what he's done. Mm-hmm. All right. So it's a rich passage. Some passages, I mean, in a way you could say this is true of all of them, but some of them are like so dense, they're almost like bottomless in the sense of like how much you could draw out of them. And in a lot of ways, this is one of those passages that is like more dense than the typical passage. It's one of the I guess, richest passages you could say within the biblical writings. Yeah. But we're going to close it down with our final segment of the night, which is talking with Jesus. The idea is, I think it's important within a church to have spaces where we can have the ability to basically learn what it is to pray, and to have the chance to kind of stretch ourselves in different ways. So let me say this, there's no pressure to like pray or anything like that, but I also want to make the opportunity available for people to learn how if they would like to. And so in your notes that are like kind of set aside, the ones that have the staple in them, to be able, those are always like put together just to say, and of all the slides we covered, these are some things that I hope you find helpful and valuable that you can take home and reference later. But the top page is always something that's designed to help kind of foster your prayer life. And the prayer for this week is actually called the prayer of compline, or the prayer of completion. The Book of Common Prayer is a prayer that's played a big role kind of within the history of the church. And it's got different prayers, and it's used for different things. But the prayer of compline, a lot of times when I'm praying with my kids at night, sometimes we'll just pray conversationally. Sometimes we'll pray the Lord's Prayer. This is one that we'll pray sometimes. And I think it's helpful to know that sometimes we can use the words of those who came before us and use those. It's like no one can talk to God for you, right? That no one can pray for you. In a way, you're the only one who can actually tend to your relationship with God. But as we do so, I think it's worth recognizing that we can make use of the words of those who came before us. And I think these are particularly valuable ones. And so I think what I'll do is just invite you to pray with me, and I'll pray them. And then you can take these home with you, and you can use them in your own prayer life, if that makes sense. So, yeah, so if you pray with me, and I'll probably add some explanation into what these all mean. Jesus, we thank you for the time together tonight. We thank you that you invite us all into a direct relationship with you, that your love for us is personal, your love for us is relational, that you're not far off and aloof and distant or remote, but you are involved in the intricate details of our lives, and that you're pursuing us in each and every season. And so we thank you for that. Thank you for the chance to come together tonight and to learn more about you and the life that you invite us into. And we just want to make use of these words now as we pray together. And we ask these things. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night. And give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend to the sick, Lord Christ. Give rest to the weary. Bless the dying. Soothe the suffering. Pity the afflicted. Shield the joyous. And all for your love's sake. Amen. Amen. The couple pieces, I think a lot of this is probably self-explanatory, but bless the dying is, some people have talked about the work of a pastor is basically helping people to die well. and I think, the word bless in biblical sense actually means happy. And so in a way it's be with those who are dying, that they've lived like a full, content life, and they know where they're going as a result of their relationship with you. Soothe the suffering is more so those who are suffering right now in the immediate. Pity the afflicted is a little bit different. Suffering, I think, happens to everyone in seasons. Those who are afflicted, though, what this is describing is people who have suffering that marks their lives in a way that is, in a sense, endless. That there's sometimes we go through things and it's a difficult season and then things get better. Sometimes we have things that won't get better this side of Jesus coming back. And so pity the afflicted is a way of saying, would you, in a sense, give grace to and soften the suffering of those who are afflicted by suffering in this life. And so in a way, I think it's a really meaningful prayer to offer. It's intended to be prayed at night. And it's, I think, a really meaningful way to pray in a way that turns our attention to the circumstances that so many other people are going through, and to ask God to be present with them. So, all right, so that's the end of Midweek Reset. Hope you had a chance to catch your breath, connect in community, and reset your focus on that which matters most. Hopefully you're walking away with a clear sense of what John 1 is all about, in a sense of who the author is, what the background is, and why they're saying what they're saying, that's a huge role in being able to make sense of the Bible for our own lives. So thank you all for coming. Last thing I'll say, actually two things real quick. We're off next Wednesday. It's fall break in the Alpine School District, so a lot of people are traveling anyways. And so we're off, but then we come back for 4 more weeks of this. And so don't come next Wednesday. The doors will be locked and the lights will be off. But after that, we'd love to have you back. And if you did enjoy it, there might be someone else in your life that would enjoy this as well. And feel free to extend an invite to them. So thank you all for coming. Mm-hmm. No, we're good. Mm-hmm.
Savior, I come, quiet my soul. Remember, redemption's hill.
my sorrow and dead in my sin, lost without hope, no place to begin. Your love made a way to let mercy come in. When death was arrested, my life began. Ash was